In this video, I wanted to talk about a time plot and just try to synthesize and use some information to discuss, the implications of a time plot. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I forgot, and this is a habit I'm going to try to be in, is labeling my graphs, which I have not been doing. And I just recommend that you do this in your notes. So that way, when you go back and look at it, it's easier to tell what it is. Because, when we're talking about it, it, made a lot of sense that this represented the age of my students. But, now if you look back at it a day later, you might have no idea what that means. And, over here, this was our GPA. And just putting a little header or something to indicate what a graph is always a good habit. And then, on our pie chart, probably was a good idea to just write that this was our age. Oops, did not mean to do that. Get back there. Circle's trying to run away. Okay, age. Okay, let's get back to the time plot. There we go, moving things again. So a time plot is basically, it's sort of like a graph in a mathematics class, and most graphs in a math class wouldn't be time plots, but it's a graph where the x-axis represents the flow of time, and the y-axis is basically, well, it could be any sort of thing, but it's something that's changing as time progresses. And it could be a collection of data points, but usually it's connected together with lines. And the lines, the more, like in looking at the Dow Jones over the past 5 years, you can see there's a lot of little variation to this time plot because this is probably consisting of thousands of different data points all connected together. But sometimes you might connect, only 5 or 10 data points together. But the more wiggly it is, for lack of a better term, it just kind of is representing that there's more data points in this, and the more real accurate it is over time. And we could always make a time plot. We would need data that is organized based on year. Like what we could be faced with is given, like, say 100 data points where, in January 2017, the Dow Jones was this. In February of 2017, the Dow Jones was this. We could plot all the points, connect the dots, and so forth to create our own. But, a lot of times they take a lot of time to create. So in this case, let's just go ahead and try to figure some stuff out and answer the questions about it. And what it asks us is, would you say this time series data exhibits cyclical behavior or an upward or downward trend? So a cyclical behavior typically means that it's something that goes up and down, up and down, up and down in a very predictable way, where it could technically be going up and down more over time. But with the Dow Jones, we can see that there are some ups and downs, but it's not like a consistent pattern. A cycle is always something that happens in a very consistent, predictable way. And so I would say that no, this is not cyclical at all. But something which more resembles a wave, like a sine or a cosine function, would be something which may be cyclical. And there's other types of data which can be cyclical as well. It doesn't necessarily have to fit exactly that waveform. But with the Dow Jones, I'd say it consistently seems to be increasing over the years. Now, there are certain things which aren't, but if I sort of were to form a trend line, and we'll talk more about this later in the class, it seems to generally follow a fairly linear pattern to it. So I'd say it's upward for the most part, with a few hiccups along the way, a few spikes, a few downtrends. Like what, another question is, are there outliers, or is there any data? And actually, we're going to define outliers in a little bit more of a numerical way in chapter 2. But, in 2020, we can see that there's quite a big hit to the Dow Jones, which it did recover and kind of continue along its normalized trend since then. But I would definitely say that there is an outlier on this graph. Something that's just sort of outside of the norm, the general behavior that something is exhibiting at the end of the day. And like a lot of times, again, I wouldn't say this is cyclical because it's not, this sort of outlying behavior is not predictable. It's not normalized. And as we all know, the 2020 trend was caused by the coronavirus outbreak and panic and whatever that came from that. And there's in human history, there's a lot of other, evidence that this sort of thing happens, but it's not necessarily predictable because these sorts of things don't happen in, predetermined time periods. Anyways, In the next video, we will begin chapter 2. We're going to be talking more about data points and actually analyzing things such as mean, median, standard deviation, quartiles, and so forth. We'll define what all that means, and we'll use the same data that we use in this video, in the last few videos, to study those sorts of terms.